Okay, I'm just going to read a little bit from lesson 282. I will not be afraid of love today. Father, your name is love and so is mine. Such is the truth. And can the truth be changed by merely giving it another name? The name of fear is simply a mistake. Let me not be afraid of truth today. Well, welcome everyone. Welcome, Christopher. What we'd like to do is just to hear your story of your journey on your spiritual journey. So there's no time limit. We've got plenty of time. So if you want to go back to the very beginning, that's fine with us. But just where you feel like it's a good place to start, and just let us know your story, your journey.
Well, it's a really funny one, isn't it? I mean, I'm reminded of when I met and came to know Ted, and Theo Poppy Jr. is like Pope. Talk about the lineage of popes, and here he was again arguing with God that he didn't want to have to do it again and be crucified. My story is that when I was born, I was in the first week I was dying, and you were from pneumonia apparently. So the nursing sister grabbed me and baptized me John. That was going to be it. And then World War II was on, and penicillin had just been invented or discovered. And there were a lot of Americans based in Brisbane during World War II in the Pacific War. And the doctor said, I've got penicillin, but we don't know. It's really incredible. Up to then, all the troops were dying mainly of infection from wounds rather than from being killed. But penicillin changed the day. So he said, this is an amazing wonder drug, but we don't know how much to give a child. My mother agreed that he experiment, and he did, and I survived. So then I was rechristened Christopher. So I became Christopher John. So twice baptized, so twice blessed. I grew up in a very conventional household. My father was in the bank, and he was moved around a lot, so we just went from town to town. And I had a conventional childhood, teenagehood, adulthood. And then one day I came in late from playing squash in the evening and saw a woman on TV, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, talking about out-of-body experiences. And, well, life... out of body after you died experiences. And my mother had had such an experience when I was 21. I went on the operating table, and she told the family that she became aware she was above her body and looking down on the tops of the surgeons and looking down on the cupboards, and then she was horizontal. And then she just floated up through the ceiling, and off she went feet first into this long tunnel. And she described the experience as lovely and wonderful, and heading towards the light. And then suddenly that stopped, and she was zooming back into her body. And that was that's a very short version of what she described. So here it was. Here's Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, first visit to Australia, the deaf and dying lady at the time. And this was in the 70s. And I was so intrigued, I spoke to a friend next day about what I'd heard her say. And my friend said, oh, I work for the advertising agency who organised her tour here. She's speaking in Brisbane in a couple of days' time, and you can go and listen to her. So I went to this workshop, and I had the most extraordinary experience. At the time, I had questions. I realised I didn't know what the meaning of love was. And so this funny little woman, she was one of triplets. You all know the story of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, I'm sure. But she, after World War II, she was in Austria. She went into one of the prisoner of war camps where at the end of World War II, they couldn't move them out of the camps. They were so ill and emaciated. They had to very gently give them a bit of soup and broth and before they could be moved. If they fed them ordinary food, they died. Anyway, she became totally engrossed in what she experienced with all the people there. And she noticed in the cabins where the children had been that they'd drawn butterflies over every inch of the timber inside the cabins. And later on, she became a psychiatrist, and she found that children who were terminally ill often saw butterflies everywhere, and they drew butterflies. And then she became aware of people having out-of-body experiences, and then she had experiences of children, particularly who died and the parents are grieving, would reappear. And sometimes she was present with the parents, and she would see the reappeared child totally healed and whole, who would appear for a few moments and talk to the parent and reassure them that they were perfectly whole, healed, safe, and not to be concerned. So that was Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. A local doctor friend of mine, who was our family doctor, I happened to be talking to shortly afterwards. And he was there as well, but I didn't see him. He told me he was so impressed that he decided to support Elizabeth in her future tours to Australia, and would I join him? So I set up a foundation called the OG Foundation, and we organised her tours in Australia as she did talks all over the place. And she was educating the medical profession about grief and a whole range of things that we all know about now. But her workshops were quite extraordinary. She had psychotherapists there, and she would take people through extraordinary journeys of healing. And I was at a stage in my life where I felt I needed that, and so I underwent some of the psychotherapy sessions. And the first one I had was that I realised that I had a death wish. And I realised also that most people I knew had a death wish unconsciously. And I still see it in many people around me, and I understand that they have a death wish. And that basically most of us are afraid of life. And then, Kevin, it comes back to the lesson you read today, which is just perfect, about love, because it reminded me that from my perspective, the biggest fear we have is to love. Because if you love unconditionally, you're totally defenseless. Now, that's not really my story, but that's a bit of it. So I had an extraordinary experience with psychotherapy, the group that we had. And during that time, one of the group, I overheard one day talking to another group member about a book he'd just come across called A Course in Miracles. And I was not a church follower. I never read the Bible, and I really didn't relate to anything much at all, except I thought the words attributed to Jesus that I become aware of, I thought that made sense. Anyway, I decided I wanted to read this book, but I wasn't ready. I just separated from my first wife. My life was pretty much a mess. But I realized I really didn't understand what love was about. Oh, yes, and during the workshop I went to Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's, at the end she said, "Are there any questions?" And I had questions about love. And so someone else, I was right at the back, so she was this tiny little person sitting on a stool on the stage, drinking black coffee and smoking cigarettes. And she would answer a question, but she would always include in the answer the question in my mind, and my mind would go, yes, but what about so-and-so? So someone would ask another question, and she would answer my next question. I never said a word to her, but I felt this incredible, extraordinary connection, mind to mind, with this tiny little wizened she looked anything bar spiritual. And here she was doing the most extraordinary teaching. about love and forgiveness and reconciliation that she learned from so many people when they were terminally ill, and she would be with them. So again, I still didn't understand what love was. So I heard about this book, A Course in Miracles, and the thought was, I want to read that book, but I'm not ready yet. Now, about 2 months later, I woke up one morning and decided I was ready to get the book. I went to Brisbane, where I knew it was obtained, and found that you had to order it, and it took 3 months to come from America by ship. I ran into an acquaintance there, and we had a chat. I told him why I'd come to Brisbane, and he said, "Oh, I ordered that book, and it's just come. And in fact, I ordered 2 sets. You can have the other set if you want." So I had it immediately. So if you're looking at synchronicities, suddenly in my life there were a whole range of them. And in that first week of reading that book, I started to have experiences on about day 5. I was driving to work, and I remember at a particular spot on the highway, which I still remember every time I reached that spot, that every person and every car driving towards me, I knew it was me. There was no separation. I didn't understand what that was in those days, but I experienced it. Now, you might wonder why I could suddenly start to have experiences so quickly, but I missed perhaps an important part of the journey, and that was towards the end of my marriage with my first wife. I'd tried everything to reconcile the marriage, and I finally just gave up. What happened then was I became very ill. The doctors could not diagnose what was wrong with me. They ran every test under the sun, which seemed to just make the condition worse. In the end, I was just basically had no energy. I lost 2.5 stone. And I spent just curled up in a what they call a fetal position most of the time, except I managed to crawl to work for a few hours, come home at lunchtime, lie down, crawl back to work. Apart from that, and that went on for about 40 days. At the end of that time, I suddenly was feeling better, and I started to eat. I ate 5 meals a day. I ate as much as I could each time until I was totally full, but I was still hungry. So I just did that for a few months, and I put all the weight back on. The extraordinary thing was, though, I was aware of everyone's emotions, feelings, and thoughts around me. Not only that, I was aware of anyone I knew. When I thought of them, I knew exactly how they were. And if I went into a room full of friends at some social gathering, 20 or 30, without trying, I'd be aware of how everyone was in the room. And if I started speaking to one of these people, and they would burst into tears. I just had this sort of awareness, or, whatever you want to call it. Now, that was before Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, so you can understand, I really wanted to understand what the hell was going on. And when I opened the Course in Miracles, the first thing I read was, in the first paragraph, as you all know, it's like, this is a Course in Miracles, is a required course, blah, blah, blah. But it cannot teach the meaning of love, because that is beyond what can be taught. And I went, yes, this guy knows something that no one else on this planet knows. It didn't occur to me to see who the author was. I had no interest at all. I just sort of, wow, this is for me. and I was hooked. But the strange thing is, I then started immediately on the workbook lessons. And I just read the workbook lesson first thing in the morning, and I'd often forget it during the day, so I'd write it on a little bit of paper. So when I was at work with clients with some problem, I go, oh, this person's got a problem. They'd be talking away. I just pull out this bit of paper and read the lesson, daily lesson, and just focus on that. And quite often, after about an hour, they go, oh, they go around in circles, and the problem would be solved for them while I just sat and watched and focused on the lesson. And I came to realize it didn't matter what lesson I focused on, they all had the same effect. So that's basically, that's the first part of my story. Kevin, I've been monologuing. Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you. Sarah's got her hand up maybe for a question while you've got Sarah.
Yeah, just a quick one. What were you working as?
I was a lawyer.
Oh, that's interesting. I thought you were going to say like therapist, but that's interesting that you're a lawyer.
Well, I did a lot of counselling.
You would have. And the other thing I was going to say was what year are we in at that point in time?
Yeah, well, look, it was 31 when this all started. Oh, before that happened, okay. Before I had the meltdown with my second wife, I went on a trip overseas to Europe, and I had experiences of the energy of each country being so totally different in Europe. I mean, I just crossed Belgium, and it was like being in a different universe. And then again into Germany was different again, and I could feel the energy of all these various countries, and the people seemed to reflect that. And when the further north I went up towards Scotland, the more at home I felt. But when I got to the Scottish Highlands, I just felt I was home. It was really strange. One of the trips to Europe, my friend from Australia with whom I was staying had arranged a camping trip with up to the coast, on the Normandy coast of France. And one of our fivesome was his name was Bill, and he was a helicopter pilot in the RAF in England, and he used to do rescues in the North Sea in gales. And I became aware that he had a death wish. So I could tell he had a death wish. And I thought, he's going to die in the North Sea doing a rescue in the gale. Anyway, I came back to Australia, and a couple of weeks later, his mate and my mate rang me to tell me he died. He was riding his motorcycle and was clipped by a car in London and slid into a curb and just impacted his jaw. So he died slowly, a slow suffocation. I knew he wanted to die, and I couldn't say anything to anybody. Yes, anyway, and then I started seeing grey around people who had illnesses and things, and but I could never say anything to anybody.
Yeah, Christopher, what was that like, not being able to tell anybody? What were you doing with that in your head? Like,
well, that was before I had A Course in Miracles. So I mean, you just can't say. I didn't know what to do. I didn't do anything with it. It was okay. Okay, so the timeline is this: trip overseas to Europe and Britain when I was 31. A few years later, a meltdown. Recovery, saw Elizabeth Kubler-Ross on TV, went and listened to her, got involved with supporting her of the group, her tours to Australia, separation from my first wife, continued with the group supporting Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, continued with the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross group, heard about A Course in Miracles, and then started to have experiences just using the workbook. During that time, I guess, when I could see people were in distress, I would interact with them. So usually, as I mentioned, all I had to do was say a couple of words and they'd be in tears and they'd pour their heart out to me. During the time that I spent with with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross when she came, I just started to go to hospitals and visit terminally ill people. They were strangers to me, but I would hear about them from a mutual friend, and I would just sit with them, and they wanted to talk. As Elizabeth Kubler-Ross explained, they wanted to talk about their death, their life, and family members with that. So, and again, I was a total stranger. So the strange thing was they always seemed to know why they were dying. And they knew that they'd chosen to die, and they knew that they'd chosen to become ill usually to punish some family member, or to manipulate some person, a former lover or someone, to come and see them. I had a lot of confirmation personally, not that I was seeking it, of what Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was talking about the human condition and about our strange ways of navigating this existence. Any questions there, Kevin?
I've got a question I've been waiting to ask. I love it when people have gone to the academy and had some experiences there. I'd love to hear about what your experiences of the academy were.
Right. Well, when I married my second wife, she came to my office. I had kept having these dreams that I was going to marry. My next partner would be someone who was a client, but the thing is, I had a rule I never took out. I never mixed business with pleasure, so I never took out a client. So this woman turned up at the counter one day, and I came out and went, "Oh my God, it's her." And she later told me, "Oh my God, it's him." But I was doing pro bono work by that time for people doing community charity work. So I figured I didn't have to break my rule because I wasn't charging. So we got together, and we both wanted to have a healing centre. So then, to cut a long story short, we heard about Endeavour Academy, and we ended up over there. We were privileged to be on a number of what's called intensives, that's 3-day intensives, apart from the academy, where I think I probably had the most significant experiences rather than at the academy itself. So you want to know about experiences? Oh, there's numerous ones, but one I recall in Holland, in a place called the Bees and Mortal, out in the way out in the country, a 3-day intensive with a master teacher, and he was talking about one of the famous painters, Rembrandt, and how Rembrandt he would have all these individual faces in a very large grouping of people, and the master teacher was explaining what politically, and he talked about particular classic faces that the Dutch had, and he swung around to one woman who was elderly, and he said, for example, this woman has a classic face for one of the Rembrandt paintings, and he said, but who she truly is not how she appears to be. And he swung around and pointed to her, and I found myself sort of standing right behind him, so I would see what he was looking at. And this woman's face just transformed before my eyes to the most magnificent, what would you call it? Well, just extraordinary, just extraordinary. And I could sense that she felt it, and so her face lit up. She just lit up, and it was only for a moment or two. And these were things that I experienced quite often when I was in the presence of the master teacher. he would look out on an audience, and I would look out on the audience, and he'd be talking away. And I think, my God, you do this every day, and these people are just standing there like stunned mullets. They just don't get it. But he never ever stopped. He never judged anyway. He just, And then when I first went to the academy, he knew I was a lawyer, and one of his sons was a lawyer. So he'd be talking away, and then he'd just quote some legal maxims in Latin and look at me and grin, And then, but then in the first few weeks when I was there, he'd be ad-libbing A Course in Miracles, and it would be pure course. And then he'd say the same phrase backwards, and my mind was trying to track him. And then he would just laugh. He'd just look at me and laugh his head off and say, "Still trying to work it out." And he was just, yeah, that's the sort of thing that I experienced with him personally. And then again, one day when we were out, just a small group of us, and Bill Gates had just set up his foundation at the suggestion of Melinda. And he said, "Oh, Bill Gates is just donating $10 million, I think it was, for research in cancer from his foundation. Why do you think he did that?" And here I am. So I'm right beside him and trying to think of what's a reasonable answer. And he just looked at me and he pissed himself laughing. He said, "No reason." In other words, he's trying to get me to see the insanity of the world. There's no reason here. When people say why this or why that, or it's not, it's like this, getting reason, trying to find reason in a place that's acting unreasonably, it's pointless. Why did someone do that? No reason. Why did someone kill someone? Why did someone, molest someone? Why did someone? No reason. If they were reasonable, they never would have done it. If we were in our right mind, this wouldn't be going on. Anyway, that's my take on it. Does that help?
Yep. So going back to you're starting off the early lessons, can you continue on from there, like as you went through the book? Any other experience you had, or what happened to you during that time?
I'd just like to sort of even because you got with your second wife. So, you said obviously you left your first wife. There was stuff going on, I guess. So I'm wondering whether the application of the workbook lessons, so your relationships, was your relationship with your second wife different in that way, where it started changing your relationships that seemed to be personal relationship with your wife and children and all that sort of thing as well. So if that makes sense, does that question make sense? Or did you still sort of have the same things coming up in your second marriage that were there in the first marriage? That sort of thing.
Oh, right. No. My first wife was insane, and for help, I tried to help this poor woman who didn't really want to be helped, and I just couldn't see it, and finally I just gave up, and I left the marriage because she insisted that I do. And then I found out afterwards that she insisted I do because she then thought that I would come back with my tail between my legs and be totally subject to her whim and her control. And the first night I left, no plan. I left in the morning. I told her I decided, I'm going to go, and told the children, and I went to work. And during the morning, my mate, who I had been to visit in England, he was then in Australia, he happened to ring, and, I said, I've broken up and, I've left. He said, well, where are you going to stay? And I said, I have no plan. He said, you can stay with me. So that night I went back and got a toothbrush and a foam mattress and a change of clothes. And I slept in the lounge room of his house on the lounge floor on my mattress. So I woke up in the morning and I had this incredible sense of peace. I have never felt it before or since. And I just thought, oh my God, this is what the Bible calls the peace that passeth all understanding, or whatever the phrase is. And I went, oh my God, you know. And I realized I couldn't go back. Although my first wife begged me to, because it hadn't worked. Anyway. So the second marriage, no, it was the most blessed time. I had the most extraordinary relationship for 30 years with Gail. We lived and worked together almost every day of that time. We did different things, but we always were together. We brought up a blended family of 5 teenage boys. And we laughed a lot.
Were they the children from your first marriage as well, or did you have a relationship with them?
Beg your pardon? Relationship with my kids?
For the first marriage, didn't you say you had kids with your first marriage?
Yes, I had a son and daughter. Yes. And I did, and Gail had 4 boys. So after Gail and I got together, we were living in a little cottage in the same town where my son and daughter were living with my first wife. And I was very concerned about my son because I had come to realize that his mother did not relate to men. And she never understood our son, and she thought there was something wrong with him. And as a small child, he did nothing but try to please her, and nothing ever did. And he was just wasting away. He was just this forlorn, wasting away little boy. And I knew I couldn't apply for custody because that would have been too traumatic for my children. And so I just prayed and hoped that someday I would have a stable family situation where he could come and live with me. So he became very friendly with a couple of Gail's boys, and one in particular, and they started hanging out together. So after school, he would be round at my house every day. And one day, the eldest of Gail's boys said to him, "Are you living here now?" And he said, "No." He said, "What? Well, why don't you? You're here all the time." And he went, "Oh, okay." So they just went round to his mum's house, and he said to his mother, "Oh, I'm moving in with Dad," got some clothes, and that was it. So, and he, for the first 6 months living with Gail and I and his stepbrothers, she cooked him breakfast every morning and fed him like a 2-year-old. She played airplanes with him. He'd have a boiled egg, and she would get some egg on the spoon, and she'd go woo around like that, like an airplane, and then she took him through that. She took him through that. What's the word? That stage which he just had never experienced with his mother. I mean, I'd tried to be father and mother to him, but, it's very difficult to be both. Every night for the first 3 years of his life, from 2 to 5, in the middle of the night, he'd wake up and start screaming. And I would just wake up from a deep, I just got used to it. I'd wake up and immediately go to him in his bed and just stroke his head. And if I got there quickly enough, he would calm down and go back to sleep. He was a very troubled little boy. But the problem was, as far as I could see, was that his mother just didn't relate to him. And he could sense it. anyway, that's another part of the story. So.
Okay, at this point, has anyone got any questions at this point?
Yeah, Kevin, I got a question for you.
Yeah.
Are you ever going to ask Christopher to talk about his experience with the course?
Yeah, I did. Then Annie jumped in and asked something else. Christopher, your experience with the course, you got up to the early lessons and then we sort of got sidetracked.
Oh, okay. Well, for the whilst I continued to, let's see, next 3 years, I continued to practice as a lawyer. And I just used the workbook lesson daily in my law practice. So with with anyone who had any problem, I would just use that silently to myself. So I'd have court cases where there were disputes, and I got to the stage where I became aware that if I could arrange for both parties to the dispute to meet with their lawyers, I would be shown a solution to the problem that would suit both parties. And that's just what happened. I mean, I just didn't even question it. I didn't think it was unusual. That's the way it was. So for me personally, I felt so blessed in my life. Did I have experiences? Yes, but I had experiences in extending the idea to others in that sense, in that way. I found early in the piece that I couldn't talk about it to anybody because they had no understanding. They couldn't see. So when I heard the master teacher talk about his experience after he was in hospital, and he could see things that he hadn't seen before and couldn't understand that no one else could see them, I had that same experience. Yeah, that's the way it was. Oh, and the other thing is, shortly after I met my second wife, she was asked to organise. She was on the Sunshine Coast, about an hour and a half drive from where I lived, and she was asked to organise a venue for Judy Scutch, which by then I had just had for a few months, and so Gail organised the venue, and Judy Scutch and Bill Whitson came and did a joint presentation, and then they stayed with Gail at her place, and I stayed with them, and then we spent the next day at the beach at Noosa, just sharing anecdotes and how we got together. And so I'd only just gotten together with Gail. We shared our story. And Judy had just gotten together with Bill, and she shared his story, their story. And she was at a social gathering, and her host said, "I want you to meet someone new," and she was taken over to the fireplace, and there was Bill, and she was introduced to him, and she said he was very rude. He just said, "What took you so long?" Whereas the bits is missing that shortly after I met Gail, we spent a weekend on one of the Bay Islands out from Brisbane, and we were walking along the beach, and I suddenly found myself saying to Gail, "And don't you ever leave me again," really angrily. She said, "I do." That was in a previous incarnation when we were in France, and I left and I didn't give any explanation, and I promised not to do that again. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Thanks, Christopher. Now, Teddy, did you get your answer? Teddy, do you want You and Teddy and Clive, you know Christopher a bit better than I do. Do you want to, anything you want to get some information out of him? You can tell us.
I mean, my only thing is there are people here, and Christopher's been sort of like, I don't know what the right word would be. I mean, he's talking about Judy Scutcheon,
He was
and
her
this is
father.
he did this.
Yeah.
I mean, he did this. He was the lawyer who I got sued with by the foundation. So he's had a pretty decent history with the course and the course community. And I sort of thought other people here who were here may have had course interest rather than, biographical interest. But that's just,
right.
I could be out of my mind.
So just to clarify here, Christopher was in your corner, not in Judy Scutch's corner.
Right.
I mean, I don't know this history. I just want to be clear about this. I know Judy's an old friend of yours in between being sued by her, but that kind of deal. I get it now. Okay. Well done.
Well, Christopher definitely got the guidance, was part of the team that got the guidance directly to actually publish, to print Bill's edit of A Course in Miracles. So I think
That's a good story.
he was in Jesus's corner. He was in following the guidance that he was given corner.
I forgot about that. Well, about A Course in Miracles, yes. Well, Ted, of course, was in constant contact with Conson, and when the text and the original, the original editing that Bill had done came to light, and we all know how, but it came to light, and then suddenly Adele and I, Ted was in America, and Gail and I, with Robert Bruce, arranged to meet a guy doing radical forgiveness, and the only place we could meet him was at Alice Springs. We did that, and then we ended up out at Ayers Rock, and the English guy and his wife left, and we were due to fly out the next day, and Gail said, let's go back once more to the rock and meditate. We went early in the morning on the 12th of September. And we did our meditation, and in that the three of us got most strongly that we were to publish the original version of the course. We came back to our hotel, and the maid met us at the door with some towels and said, I'll let you in. And then she saw our TV and said, oh, your TV's not on. So she went over and switched it on, and there were the Twin Towers coming down. It was September 11 in America, 2001. And the thought in my mind was, oh my God, the world's changed forever. There's not a lot of time left. And I said to Jesus, it's the first and probably the only time I've actually, unconsciously just had a chat and said, you didn't have to let this happen to persuade me that there's not much time left, or we really need to get this out. And all I ever saw the Sparkly book was as a correction that needed to be put out, that's all. And I didn't have any, I wasn't attached to it being there permanently. I'd read in the one of the special messages to Helen after the course was first scribed, that it would be that the Course in Miracles would be there for a certain period, and then apparently would be superseded, or other things would happen, but it would play its part. And I never understood that, but I just accepted that this is all part of the correction of 2,000 years ago.
Okay, so Christopher, what's your life like now then? What's your sort of days look like, and what do you do? Like, things come up in your life, and what do you do with them when they do come up?
I laugh a lot, and I'm very peaceful, and looking for the next thing to do. I spent some years with Adele. We were caring for family members after we all left Byron Bay. So it was a time of assisting various family members to pass away. Some died in our home very peacefully. One family member, Adele's father, when he must have seen angels. He passed away in the middle of the night, and he just had this most angelic look on his face that I've never seen before in anyone else before or since. Then Adele became ill and she died. That's 12 years ago now. And I've been finding my way back, I guess, to total immersion in the Course, and then the sequel, The Course of Love. Presently started this January on the first lesson of the workbook. So it's lesson 80 today, I think. And I really, really enjoy that. What do I do with my day? I've started doing some legal work again. I have a younger brother who's a barrister. I've presently got a couple of cases on. I have no illusions about what that's all about, but it's a way of helping me to focus and sharpening my mind and being active. So, and of course, you know, like most people, an extra dollar wouldn't hurt. So.
Do you still have the same experiences you had when you were younger, that when you meet someone, you sort of know what they're emotionally?
No, that only lasted for it only lasted for so many years, and then it faded.
Were you happy about that, or were you thinking, oh, you miss it, or you're sort of glad it's gone?
Well, I'm not unhappy about that aspect of it, but the greater awareness is something that is partly my motivation for revisiting the workbook.
I think that's important to mention, actually, Chris. That's really good that you did mention that, because we can have like experiences that seem in time that seem to be quite prolonged for a moment, and then they do tend to fade. As he says, you know, we have many light experiences and stuff, but they will pass. So it's really good that you mentioned that. But I wanted to know too is, like you said, you didn't really understand anything about love. You know, you mentioned that at the beginning. So where are you with that now?
Oh, I have a much greater understanding of love. Yes. Yes. And I'm very wary of romantic love.
What happened to your second wife?
She died of cancer 12 years ago.
So I just want to say this. So, Christopher.
Yeah.
Before, when you were talking just about life, you called her Gail. And as soon as we talk about the Course, you called her Adele. I thought that.
Well.
I was wondering about that, because I was going, I thought Adele would have been your second wife you met Jennifer, and you kept on referring to her as Gail, and I thought, did you have a third wife and Adele was your third wife?
No. Her name was Gail. Her name was Gail Adele Green at maiden name.
Oh, okay.
And then when she married, she was Gail Adele Perry, and the thing is, she was always called Gail, and then one day she decided, I don't like Gail. I never have. And this was not long after I said, I don't like being called by my nickname. I'm going to revert to my Christian name, Christopher. So I reverted to that, and she decided, I'm going to call myself Adele.
It was Christopher.
So depending on who I'm.
Yeah, because when you were
depending on who I'm talking to, I call her Gail, or I say Adele, because you know some know her as Gail and some know her as Adele.
Yeah, so most of us here know of her as Adele, and when you were talking about your relationship with her, I'm thinking, well, yeah, that sounds like Adele, and we can all testify, us who were involved with know Christopher through the through the Miracle Centre. We all know what a dynamic duo they were and how helpful they were and how instrumental they were. And what a blessing the two of them were to so many of us at the Miracle Centre, and how they were just this quiet humility sort of working in the background, really. They were just a really beautiful.
Well, I would say that the way Australia happened would never have happened without Gail and Christopher, or Christopher and Adele. and then
the three of them.
Too. At the beginning,
there was a third person. I can't think of his name, but I think it was something like Ted. Was his name Ted?
No, he came in later. He came in later, actually. It was Christopher and Adele, and probably Ted Poppy Jr. came in later, and he was.
He turned up for a couple. He turned up for a couple of weeks and left, and then he got to the airport and went, "Oh, I can't leave." I recall you saying, you came back. You said, "I got to the airport and I rang the master teacher and said, I can't leave. This is my call." He said they're not going to be able to do this without me. And you could see, and you're absolutely right. It would have been total disaster. And I won't name names, but so you came back, and most of us were delighted, and one or two people were very, very pissed off.
Hey, Christopher. I would like to thank you and Adele for keeping the balance of the universe intact with your quiet humbleness, as Annie described, because Teddy and I would never be described as quiet and humble. So very well done.
I feel like I get the same feeling from you, Clemmy.
Seems to be learning.
Say what, Teddy?
You're learning humility. I can see that. You're married.
Oh yeah, that's the teacher right there, my friend.
Anyone got any questions or comments?
Well, then I will address Christopher one more time. So thank you for reminding me. I tell people I keep my friends around because they remember more about my life than I actually do, since so much of the past has disappeared for me. So I always appreciate them. And when you told that story about the old man looking at you and telling one side of a particular idea or position, and then immediately flipping it to the other side, you remind me of that was my first experience of actually releasing my mind. Was in the beginning, he would just be so strong in his position when he delivered an idea, and I'd be going in my head, yeah, that's it. That makes so much sense. And then halfway through the session, he would jump to the other side and deliver the other position so purely and so strongly. And I'd go, wait a minute, yeah, that's it. And I would just be a freaking pinball in a pinball machine with my mind. And one day I just fell right through the middle of both sides. And here we are.
Yeah.
So, thanks for the memory.
Yeah, well, I could see that he could see. Let me put it that way. So whatever experience I'd had that I still remained, whenever I was with him, I could see what he could see, which, and I've never heard of anyone else talking about that, but actually not an autobiography, but a biography of David Hawkins, and particularly his later life. He had the same thing when he'd go to this cafe in wherever it was in the desert. There's one cafe, and he became friends with a waiter who was quite psychic. So the waiter would come over and chat to him and point to couples at a table and say, see, and he'd say, see that couple there, and he'd tell David what he was seeing. But David said when the waiter was with him, he could see it as well, but he couldn't see it by himself. And I thought that was very revealing. And I related it to it totally because that was what I experienced with the master teacher. So all I can say is from a lawyer's point of view, I used to think about the master teacher that, yeah, you've got a son who's a lawyer, but you've got a lawyer's mind. But really, really incredible. If you'd been a lawyer, man, you would have, what you could have done in court.
I'm a bit like Kevin. I just have to know, whatever happened to the master teacher? How did his experience finish here in that lifetime?
Well, everyone here is going to appear to die, like the body is going to appear to die, Sarah. So like anyone that we perceive here, he appeared to die.
Until the end?
I can answer, and I wasn't there, but through a friend, D.L. Leary, came to stay with me shortly after he died. It's really strange because D.L. was a person who sold everything, gave everything, was totally devoted. She had this chip on her shoulder that she thought she was never appreciated or accepted. And I said to her, all I ever saw was that he totally extended love to her in every possible way, far more than he did with virtually anyone else. On numerous occasions, not only when I was initially there, but on subsequent visits. And then she told me, she said that, and then in the context of when he passed away, and she told me that he seemed to be having mini strokes or something, but he would still come to a session room every day. And she said he wasn't teaching, but he would walk around the group, and he would stand in front of each one. And she said he would just be in total gratitude with tears streaming down his eyes and saying, thank you. And I said to her, what an extraordinary experience you were privy to. She didn't seem to think anything of it. And I say this in the congregation in Byron Bay. Her name was April. April had a major awakening. And she came to the session room, and we were all in a large circle, and she just went round to each one and stood in front of each one and just did the same thing. She stood in front of each one and just said, thank you, thank you, thank you. But the expression on her face was beatific. It was just extraordinary. And that had happened a couple of years prior to the master teacher's passing. So I thought that Dia was privy to that was just extraordinary, but she didn't think anything of it. Then shortly after that, he passed away.
That's kind of really funny, Christopher, you could say that, because I actually remember him, like I was only with him for 8 or 9 months. I can't remember, 10 months maybe. I was in the US over there with him. And I actually remember him acknowledging DL quite frequently myself.
Yeah, yes, he did. He did.
It's funny. It's almost that idea of, we receive what we're looking for, and we sort of reinforce, what's lacking. Our human mind is focused always on what's lacking and what's, the error sort of thing, rather than what is there and what's being given.
Well, DL was a neighbour of ours, and she was an old friend of Adele's. DL was the neighbour from hell. She could kill with her mind at 100 paces. Her energy when it was dark was unbelievable. She was a neighbour of ours at Mullaney, and we would invite her, join us to read A Course in Miracles, and she didn't want to know about it. She had a meltdown with MS or whatever and went around the world looking for a cure, stumbled into Endeavour Academy, came back, and I remember she was walking down the hill and I could see her and I could tell it was a totally different person. to how she'd been. And I remarked on it, and she was very, very shamefaced and embarrassed. And she said, "You know that book? You know that book I wouldn't look at? Well, I've come upon a place where they're living it, and I'm going back."
So she was actually the one that told you about EA then?
Yes, and she was the one who organised the first light team to come out to Brisbane. And guess who was the main presenter? He's here now. It wasn't
Hermes?
Ted. Yes.
Seriously, you came out to Brisbane?
I've never. Oh wait.
Was it you?
Yeah, you know what? It might have been true. I don't remember.
Well, I thought it was you. I thought they wouldn't say your name, but I thought it was you.
Are you sure it wasn't Theo, Christopher?
Oh, sorry, Theo.
Yeah, I was going to say I didn't think Hermes had been here. Yeah, it would have been Theo.
Oh, right. There was a light team that came to Brisbane, and then they went to Toowoomba as well. But I only saw them in Brisbane, and they wouldn't give any names or anything. Anyway, DL paid for all of that. She paid fares a lot for the teams to come over. Yep.
Hey, Christopher, one time, you reminded me of this, whoever was maybe Annie saying that the old man was teaching right till the end. One time he and I were sitting together and he said, you know, this teaching thing is kind of like being constipated. You feel like you got to shit or die. And for me, it's I got to teach or die. He says, otherwise I get so backed up, I don't know what to do with myself. And I always remember him for that. Teaching and constipation were kind of the same, he said.
It's that action, you've got to keep giving it away. No matter what the form is, you've got to keep giving it away, because any establishment or holding on is, like you say, you don't shit, you die.
Right on, Annie.
What I think is funny, we were with Steph today, and Steph and Claire were the ones who were with the old man when he passed.
Yeah.
I think they were at the house, no?
Yeah, they took him to the hospital.
They took him to the hospital. He'll be on in one of these times to see all you guys.
Steph or the old man?
Never could tell.
Okay, give me a heads up, would you? There's a woman sometime with him. He used to have all these intimations that he and I knew each other intimately in the past. I think that Christmas concert where I dressed up as a ballerina and did that dance, I think we fell in love with each other all over again.
That's right. Well, I always call you Teddy, pal.
Yeah, Christopher, I think Clive mentioned it too, about that two opposite opposing teachings, like you give one sort of teaching one day, then do the opposite the next time. I've had that same trouble in our morning group.
Do it in the one sentence.
In one sentence.
He was just brilliant. It was like, I'm tracking. I mean, my brain was strained so much, my mind to track him, and then he'd reverse it. And I'd go into sort of meltdown, you know, and here I am straining away. He would just piss himself laughing. He'd say, still, and he'd say, still trying to work it out. And he did that to me time and time again until I finally realised he was trying to get me to let go. Yeah, that was when I was first there.
Yeah, he was using the Donald Trump method before Donald Trump.
Yeah. Attack someone and then soften them up and then become friends, and they'd be so grateful that he was like he used to call Kim Jong Un Rocket Man. And then he goes and meets him and says, "Oh, he's not such a bad fellow when you get to know him, you know." It's like so he plays the crowd.
So yeah, I've had that group in the mornings. We have opinions about stuff, and I'm listening to the first opinion. I'm thinking, yeah, that sounds right. Then I'm listening to the other opinion. I said, yeah, that sounds right. They all sound right to me, and yet there's some sort of a disagreement going on. I'm thinking, what's wrong with me that I'm not getting the disagreement somehow? All I'm seeing is two different points of view that both make sense. You know, bit of a mind blowing thing.
Well, there is a lesson that addresses that. Nothing I see means anything, and nothing I hear means anything. Nothing has no meaning.
Well, I was going to say that when you started out talking, and you would see the thing around people, and they, you knew they wanted to die.
Yeah.
Well, the whole book, Jesus, there's nothing in the course. Jesus says the only reason you came here is to die.
That's right.
Kevin, there's a saying that if you can hold two mutually exclusive thoughts in your head at the same time without steam coming out of your ears, that's the beginning of awakening.
Yeah, beauty.
Of course, the thing is, there is a sequel called A Course of Love, which, when the first time I read it, was on Kindle. So I wake up and I go, hang on, in the last day or so I read a passage where it says you don't have to die. And then I could never find it. And then I come across it again in another part of the book, and I go, and then I couldn't find that. And then it came across it a third time. So I got so frustrated I had to buy a hard copy of the book because I wanted to be able to find these passages. But it's in there at least 3 times. And basically, the sequel says, as you all know, A Course in Miracles has achieved its purpose, which was just to make a tiny crack or a tiny chink in the ego of man. That's all it could do, and that was a mighty effort, and that has happened. Now, the next step with the Course of Love is to realize that, to embrace the way of the heart, but not to totally let go of mind. It's about mind and heart joining, not one dominating the other. And we all either are more left brain or right brain. So it's about marrying the two. But it also says then when you do that, you have a choice whether to let the body go, and many will just decide, well, let the body go. You don't have to get ill, you can just sort of step out of it. Or, and this is the or, is and a big but please consider staying, because you're needed here in physical form for this next step. And we need it, and a lot of us are needed. Now, that's rather interesting.
See, Christopher, I don't have any problem with what that's saying, but the idea that it's like different from A Course in Miracles and a step beyond A Course in Miracles is ludicrous to me, because all that is contained within A Course in Miracles in such a poetic, incredible, brilliant way. So I don't understand people or the book itself claiming it's a step beyond A Course in Miracles, because the Course comes from a whole mind, and it's all in everything that's said within A Course in Love is within A Course in Miracles.
Yes, but the thing is, it's expressed differently. One of the things it does is address many misconceptions that people who study the Course have embraced that are incorrect. And I don't want to name places where people congregated in communities to study it and form certain opinions, because I don't want to do that. But I used to often comment about people who said, I've read the book and they knew the text back to front. And I say they're just using it as a heavy hammer to confirm their distorted view of something. Everything can be used for positive or negative. So I read consistently and daily for 4 years, A Course of Love. And then I decided I really needed to go back to first principles, and now I read both.
Yeah, so that's great, like, because it is like anything can come in, as a correction for some of our distortions. And so it does, like for some where there has been a distortion, it will come through some sort of symbol, something will be given to make that correction. But it is, like you say, it's a distortion of what we've read in A Course in Miracles, and the correction has to be given somehow. And that can happen through, I had distortions that, some brother came along and helped correct in me. So, we're always given something at some point to correct them.
I had a major correction from Ted early in the piece I'd like to share, which it really got me to look at what I was doing. So we were looking for a permanent location to have the Miracle Centre, and we just looked at a property which everyone seemed to like except me. Because with my legal mind, I could see a lot of this and that's and the others to do with this particular property. And but Ted, there's no secrets. Ted knew exactly what I was feeling. And I suddenly found myself alone with Ted, and he said to me, you know, these are not his words, and I don't recall them exactly now, but basically the idea was that you're either in this or you're not. And if you're in this, we all have to work together and support. You know, we all have to. And I looked at my mind and thought, you're absolutely right. I'm going to have to let go entirely my idea that this direction we're going in is not the best or not a good one. We signed a contract for this particular property. We paid a deposit. And then I did the usual checks about zoning and whatever, and all the zonings and approvals that this property had lapsed. And so it was no longer of any use to us, number one. So I decided to give it my full cooperation, full effort to get this property, and it totally failed. And within a day, I ran into the brother of the family where we were temporarily staying. And he offered us a lease. So in other words, the correction was made, and that's right. Ted addressed me in the terms of, you just have to trust. You know, we just all go together. We just go forward, and we just trust if a correction needs to be made, it'll happen. We don't need to be concerned. And the correction was made, and so we ended up originally staying in a place where we were offered a lease and eventually buying it. The other thing is that when the master teacher came to Sydney to Australia for the last time, at the end of his stay, he asked Adele and I to come and visit him before he left. And we went to the apartment where he was, and he sat us down on the couch beside him, and he said two things. He said, on the third day, I realised that extending the course to Australians needs to be done without using religious vernacular. He said, they will relate to it far more from power of mind. And he said, I don't need to come here again. And he said, and I'm leaving it to you, Adele and I. And he said, I see a place on the coast under a large tent where people will gather. The place where we ended up in Byron Bay, the session room had no, it just had a tin roof and no insulation. So we insulated underneath that. Then we hung calico underneath that as a covering. And I was standing there one day looking up and went, oh my God, here's the tent and we're in it. He'd seen that years before. He would just look at his mind and look into the future, and he'd just say, blah, 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 blah. But that's one particular thing I remember.
Okay, thanks, Christopher. Clive, you were going to say something?
Just my experience of the Course of Love. My wife's worked with it quite a bit, and the simplest version I have of that experience is it is a gift of bridging. It's just a bridge, and people will step on that bridge wherever they step on it, and they might find it easier to enter into the opportunity of the Course at any time or not, but it strikes me as a bridge.
You know, Herms, that's what I got too. What I got was when I first read it, because I was at a conference and I sold everybody's books but hers. She wouldn't let me sell them. So I picked one up and I read it. And everybody was saying it's, you know, the sequel to the Course, the sequel to the Course. And when I read like direct lines that I knew were directly from Jesus. There's direct lines in there that I absolutely know are straight from him. And then there was some other stuff, and I was like, wow, this is, and I said, what is this all about? And what I was given was that it it was a way that was given that would allow people entry exactly where they were by hearing what they were hearing in this book. And eventually, by using that material, they'd come to the same sort of understanding as, we sort of get from the Course. But that's what I got too. It was just a bridge, way of mastery too.
Yeah. Thanks.
And
for
there
the
is many
confirmation.
things that put it in a language that someone's able to hear at that point in time and stuff. Or as Christopher said, there's stuff that they might just skip over in the Course and not really see, and then it's brought forth in the Course in Love in language that they can hear at that point, or they're just ready to see it at that point.
And I got to tell you too, when the old man taught and didn't use the Course, that was brilliant. He didn't need the Course to teach the Course, but it gave him something to teach. But when he taught from his own whole mind, that was it. There's nothing like it.
I agree. And I think the thing I most enjoyed was when he'd come along to the church and do a teaching there. That was just, my God, what he could see with his mind was just extraordinary. Oh, in that place. It was just.
When he came, he loved that church, and he could come and go as he pleased.
Yeah.
But when he was there, man, what he taught was not of this world at all. Nowhere to be found.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, well, I guess we'll wrap it up there. Thanks, Christopher, for joining us. I hope the recording comes out better than it sounded some of the time with the distortions, but I'm sure Annie will be able to fix it up. So,
look, I'd just like to add one thing. So for 3 years, I was the facilitator of a group of reading A Course of Love, and most of them, there were about a dozen, and I thought this won't last, but it actually lasted. Most of them stuck the distance for 3 years until the COVID hit, and that was the end of it. Only one or two of them were familiar with the Course in Miracles. I mean, they'd read it, they were aware of it. They had used other disciplines, but what I found over a period of years was they did transform quite a lot.
Yeah, like the Holy Spirit always knows what's really perfect for someone at a particular point in time. Like
Yeah.
someone said something on a Facebook group about a question about Ken Wapnick's commentaries of the workbook and whether they were helpful. And I said, I have them and they weren't helpful for me. Well, I'm not saying they're not helpful for someone else. But, and they said, what do you attribute that to, Annie? And I said, well, I attribute it to the guide that knows what I'm open to at any point in time and what will be helpful for me, which may not be for someone else, but it was for me at that point in time. So, again, it's the desire of our heart that brings into us what's most helpful, and the Spirit's in charge of what's most helpful to help us open our minds and release the blocks at any point in time.
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting comment. I'm reminded of, I was speaking to Catherine Hines yesterday, who, of course, was in Wisconsin for a long time. In the context of nothing at all, she remembered coming to visit the group that we had on the coast here of the Course of Love, and she said, if you hadn't been there holding it together, she said, I think I would have had to leave. She said they really didn't have a clue. They'd have questions, and he said you'd answer them, but they didn't understand. And it was like that. I found it so frustrating because they would want to argue the toss about everything, but they really didn't know. I just found that I did and never had really thought about it.
Well, that's one thing I find, Christopher, that has happened for me recently, that I get little moments of joining with people and they ask me something and I'm given an answer that I don't even know that's in my mind, but I know it's coming from a true place and I don't even know I know it until they ask the question. So in that sense, they're like a gift for me to sort of see, and actually show me that there's some sort of understanding there that I'm not even aware of.
Yeah.
They ask the question.
Yeah. they had no understanding of joining of minds or anything. So one day I suggested we do a healing meditation. Well, they didn't know how to meditate, so I told them how to do a very simple one, and we did it. And I suggested we do one that I'd used in Privy 2 years ago. We used to do healing meditations for babies, absent healing, which were incredibly effective. And so they're going, oh, yeah, haha. So we did this thing, and then I asked them to describe what they experienced. Well, none of them experienced anything. Then I told them what I experienced with each one of them, and they just like, they were so terrified they never wanted to do it again.
That's great. That's great.
So when I think of Master Teacher day after day, I think, God bless him. Yes, I really was in awe of him persevering. Yes, I really was.
Well, it truly is that infinite patience brings immediate results. And if you're standing at the end of time, then with Jesus, really, you've got that infinite patience. You know the end, you know that everything's, and you're willing to just give like Jesus, repetition, rinse, and at some point the mind opens. But again, in Helen's notes, it was interesting the other day, we were reading how Jesus was saying, let me arrange the miracles for you to perform, and mentioning Edgar Casey, just sort of doing it indiscriminately and of his own accord, and sort of burning himself out unnecessarily. Yep. And we notice even in the Bible, Jesus is directed not to go to certain places at certain times, because obviously it's not time for whatever there. It's not helpful in that moment.
Yes. I realise more and more that we're also inculcated with the religious teachings of the Bible, whether we've ever been to church or not, in our culture. They're so ingrained, their habits, their mindsets, and I continually still find myself being aware of some and questioning them and realising how insane it all is. Anyway, and I realise more and more that I can't help anyone, and I don't have to. I mean, there's no obligation. That's not, it's not a tick to get to heaven or not. Nothing about gaining merit in the Buddhist way. But if someone asks me for help, and I can, I gladly do. But the hardest thing for me is to gladly not do when I'm not asked. Because I can see what they're doing to themselves, and the hardest thing is to shut up and not say anything.
Yeah, I do that too. Oh no, I don't actually know, but I still try to help. Oh dear, yes. I can't wait to get to the point where I actually know what I'm talking about and can help, and then decide to help them.
I found I would get feedback from clients that I had that they say, "Oh, that advice you gave me about so and so was extraordinary. It just made all the difference in my life." And I'd say, "Really, what was that?" And they'd tell me, and I go, "I have no recollection of that, and I'm not versed in that subject. I don't know anything about it. I don't believe I could possibly have said anything." They say, "Oh, yes, you did."
I was talking to someone to come on as guest speaker, and she was a sort of bit concerned about people not hearing her. And I said, look, that's just not in your hands. It's not your concern at all. You have to drop that. And even like when people do say, oh, you were so helpful, and they say, oh, that was so helpful, and they say what it was and how it was helpful, and that was not what you were talking about at all, but somehow they've heard something in a way that's been helpful to them, even though it's sort of like nothing to do with what you were saying or whatever too. So it's like the way things work. It really is out of our hands in that sense.
Yes, and I know we're winding up. I reminded one more thing. So recently I had a hip joint replacement, one hip, because I damaged and injured it so many times over the years, not realising. Anyway, to recuperate, my daughter insisted I stay with her in Brisbane. So I with my daughter and son-in-law and their two boys, 19 and 21. And I decided that I would not intrude. I just was there. And I squeaked when I was spoken to, as they say. But occasionally I'd have one-on-ones with each member of the family. And the thing is, when I was leaving, my daughter and I had a one-on-one, and it was the most incredible joining, where she said how lovely it was for her and the family and how they so much enjoyed my being there. And yes, it was just, but the energy of it was quite extraordinary. My daughter, I have to tell you, won't have the bar of the Course of Miracles, but my son-in-law has embraced it all his life, all his adult life. And he told me that I was the person who introduced him to it, and I don't recall that. I have no idea what he was talking about. He said it was at a very, very difficult time in his life, and he said to me a few times that at various times he's come to me for help, and whatever I've said has been of incredible help to him, and I have no idea what he's talking about.
A lot of our memories kind of get washed out. Like I've got people telling me all the time that, this happened and that happened, and I don't even have the faintest negative of it left, sort of thing. Like my flat was just here, and I vaguely remembered I said, did I go to the Outback somewhere with you? There was like this one little picture, and that was all I have of it, so a lot of the memory. And I think when that really comes through the spirit too, it is really that you're giving freely in that moment, and you don't remember those stuff too. It's like really comes through the spirit, and there's just no memory of it because it's really freely given.
It doesn't, and I'm reminded of the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount, and he's saying that he opened his mouth and then he spake. I got it, because it's like then he allowed it to come through. Yes, and Ted, when that's what's happening. You used to do that in session, and when you did that, it was just extraordinary. It just poured through.
We'll have to get Ted to do that in our morning group.
Well, I was listening to. He'd just given a lesson on, a teaching about some of the basics of the course. And this was after a couple of years of being there. And early on, we'd recorded his sessions. And I was in the office and I came across this tape and someone played a bit of it. And it was exactly the same 2 years earlier. He'd done exactly the same teaching again. And I thought that was extraordinary. It was pure course. And he wasn't reading from a book. When it comes from a source, it's pure. It's spot on.
Yeah, it's like really, it's just opened your mind somehow, and I don't even know how. It happens when it's time, and that's it. And then it's not me, it's not you. It's I don't know.
Christ.
Yep.
If I could just say, underline Annie's point she made a little earlier. The more I have given up needing to tell anybody about anything, as in my opinions, the more, this has been happening for a long time now, it gets orchestrated where I just end up with somebody asking me a sincere question. And like you said, Annie, then it just gets completely pulled out of you, and you get to listen to it at the same time you're speaking it, as it's so brand new. And oftentimes they will thank me afterwards, and all I'm left with is just thanking them for the sincerity of their question that we could both share in this in the moment. And yes, that's what I wanted to say.
Thanks, Clive. Okay, well, thanks again, Christopher, for coming. It's been really nice having you here.
Yeah, thanks, Christopher. It's good to see you.
Well, that's lovely to see all you guys, yes. And Ted and Vicky there for a moment. Ah, bless you.
And Alice is there, down the corner there.
Alice is here. Oh, my God. Remember, Alice, how
Was
old were you?
Alice there?
She was
Yeah.
like 21 when the old man came out. And we started having sessions in our houses before we got this first small room at the epicenter. And then that got too small and we had to get the bigger one that we were renting out where the tent lining happened for a while.
Yeah.
There you are, Alice. Wow.
Hi. I was wondering, I was just been with my family in Melbourne, and they're really into the family tree and looking into
Right.
our roots in Scotland and everything, and Ireland. And I just wondered how, like, are you interested in that kind of thing anymore, or are you just not really into looking into ancestry and that kind of thing?
I have done that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I do have a Scottish ancestor.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
We've probably all got one hidden in the closet somewhere along the line.
Yeah.
Depends how far back we're going.
Yeah. And he was a Wallace, from
Wallace.
Braveheart.
From Braveheart.
My ancestor from Scotland was a Wallace.
Oh, okay.
It was a woman, and her name was Sarah Jane Wallace. And when my daughter was born, I wanted to call her Samantha, but when she was born, I looked at her and I couldn't do that. I ended up calling her Sarah Jane. And I didn't know I had an ancestor, Sarah Jane. Strange things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's nice to see you all.
Saying I don't recall things I say to people, I actually recall virtually everything that happened in Byron Bay. First moments of meeting you guys, a whole range of things. Yes.
Anyone, I would like to just have a moment of silence together before we just pop off. If anyone's willing to join, just to have 5 minutes together in quiet before we say our goodbyes. If you need to leave, please leave. But if we could just join together in Thanksgiving. Okay, thank you, everyone.
Can I say, Christopher, I can't leave without saying this to you. You know how you remember Dear One standing in front of everyone when he was at the end of his time. Honestly, in my heart, I can stand in front of you and everyone in this room and say thank you. But Christopher, when it was your turn and your time to play a major role and to give unconditionally and wholeheartedly, you and Adele were the demonstration of holiness, and you were the very foundation of love that Byron flourished on. But more than Byron, that expansion of giving and living the message was communicated through the sonship, and I know that to be so, and I am so very grateful and honored that I could just spend this time listening and being with you. Because after all is said and done, we're a family of brothers, and we all do come and play our parts, like Annie, you are now, and Kevin, and all of us play our parts when it's time. And it is just an overwhelming appreciation for those that do stay here in this time of Christ and are willing to continue to take their part, no matter what it looks like, humble or major, because it doesn't matter. The communication of love never lessens, and that's what I experienced tonight. No matter what your role is today, that radiation of love has never lessened. It emanates as strongly and perhaps more so, and for sure more so. So, my dear brother, I love you and I thank you, and all of you. I love you all. Thank you all for your dedication all this time.
Okay, friends, I must be off.
Okay,
Next time.
Thanks, everyone,
Okay.
for
Thank
coming.
you
I love
all.
you all. Take
today.
care.
Thank you, Vicky. Bless you all. Bless you all.
All right, ending the meeting. Thank
Okay.
you, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Christopher.
Thank
Thanks.
you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.